Good. Hi, everyone. We're very excited to have you join us for our discussion today on 9/11, 20 years later, discussing immigration and, the impact of 9/11 on immigration. And it's a few days before September 11th, but the day is coming up, and we thought we would take today to just kind of, think back to this unforgettable day, right? And the impact it had on our lives. Just share some of our personal experiences and then have a discussion on attitudes on immigration and immigrants, and then go into some actual effects on immigration. So David, do you want to introduce yourself and say hello?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Daven Ghandi. I'm an immigration attorney here in New York. So thank you, Sumaya, for inviting me yet again to come and speak on your podcast. I am excited to be here, and I am really looking forward to this discussion that we are about to have.
Perfect. So, David, you and I were talking before, when we first discussed putting together this event, and we're talking about our experiences. And I remember 9/11 being a very memorable event. I think I was in high school, my first year of high school, and I was very young, I think maybe 13, 14, I don't know, very young. And I remember that after this incident happened, I was on the train one day, and this is when I had first started wearing the hijab, and somebody came up to me, a grown man, and he called me a terrorist. And as a 15, I think I was 15, 14, 15, I don't know, but I was very young around that age. So as a teenager, having a grown adult call me a terrorist, I remember it really impacting me, and it really threw me off, because prior to that I had never experienced that kind of discrimination. Somebody deliberately come up to me and call me this name as a result of what happened with 9/11, and that incident really stayed with me. And I think that incident, as a Muslim woman, kind of encapsulates what happened after 9/11 and the people who were really, really affected by the situation.
Yeah. I mean, Shumaya, I was 13 or 14. Don't want to date myself, but I was 13 or 14 when this happened, and I was a wee little boy in Malaysia, back when I didn't even know where my life would lead me. I didn't know I was going to be in New York. I remember being glued to the TV. I think it was at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, being glued to the TV, just watching the live coverage. And I think at that moment, or at that time, the world really just kind of wept and mourned along with America. And then at that time, I think in 2002, there was a very famous documentary, and we were talking about this earlier. It was called 9/11. It was actually made by two French documentary filmmakers, and they followed the life of a rookie firefighter, which happens to be right next to the office. And these were the first responders in the World Trade Center, and was one of the only documentaries that had footage from inside the building. To me, it's really surreal now to know that 20 years later, I will be right here in New York, right next to that fire station. And I watched it yesterday just to prepare myself for today, and the emotions were still so raw. And this time I could actually see myself as somebody who could have been there at that moment, at that time. So I was so far removed, but at the same time, now we just kind of 2 decades later, I'm here now.
Yeah, because you were in Malaysia, and kind of a spectator of this event that was going on. And currently, both of us, we work not far from the World Trade Center, the new World Trade Center. We're in the financial district. And when I was in high school, the high school was located around 20-something street. So it wasn't too far. And I remember I was in gym class, and from the building, you could see the smoke. And all of a sudden, we heard the teachers going, there's pandemonium going on, something happened, there's smoke all over the city. And within the next hour or so, all of our parents were getting called, and my family lived in Queens at the time, and we were in school in Manhattan, and we didn't know how we were going to get home. At that time, people didn't really have cell phones. There were still like pay phones at that time. So it was pure chaos. I remember my uncle came, who happened to live in the city, and picked us up. We had to go get my sister from another school. Nobody knew who to talk to, how to get home. People were trying to figure out if they could take the bus, the train, or if they had to walk. I knew there were lots of people who were walking across the bridge. And the biggest thing is that there was a intense fear everywhere, right? And the sense of unknown, like nobody knew what was going on. The people who were at home, who were watching TV, they saw this event happen. And then the people who were physically there, of course, that's a different story. So, 20 years later, I still remember some of these details and the feelings of the actual day. And then, of course, after it.
Sumaya, what I've read, and what I've seen as well is that after 9/11, there was a lot of talk about America coming together. And I do agree that America did come together, but I do not think that America came together for all Americans.
Right.
I believe that there was a subsection of the community, especially the Masa community, the Muslims, Arabs, and South Asian communities who were isolated, who could not mourn alongside America because they had to battle their identity and trying to be themselves, but also facing discrimination, like you just said, what happened to you post 9/11. So I think these were communities that were marginalized, these were communities that were unfairly targeted, and these were communities that really faced a lot of hatred and prejudice following 9/11.
David, it was immediate. Like even the day of, as soon as it was identified that these were Muslims, right? One of the hijackers was from Saudi Arabia. Like immediately, the Muslim community felt a sense of apprehension about what was going to come. Everybody was scared. I know a number of people, a number of hijabis who wore their hijabs, and they were afraid to wear them because of what people would say. I mean, think about it. Me as this young teenager, having some adult come up to me and say something like that. And, I was telling you, and I think prior to 9/11, and Bush had just been elected, right? And there was this sense of community in the United States. There was a sense of belonging for Muslims. And I mentioned this Muslim Day at Six Flags. I was talking to you about it. This happened before the 9/11 event, and I went to it. So Six Flags is an amusement park, and this was a day where the Muslim community came together in collaboration with Six Flags, and like you had hundreds of Muslims in this public space praying in public, and they felt safe doing so. And I remember that I felt proud to be a Muslim. I felt safe, and then a few weeks later, whatnot, this event happened and it all changed. And we went from feeling safe and wanting to show our Muslim identity to feeling like we had to hide our Muslim identity. And the Muslim community, there's on the one hand, we have to come together and we have to speak up for ourselves, advocate for others. And on the other hand, we didn't want to be visible, right? In the fear that it'll put our lives in danger. And what exactly happened after 9/11? Muslims started to get targeted. All of these policies came into play where South Asian men, Middle Eastern men, and it's not just men, right? Muslim men and women started to become targeted. There was racial profiling. The police were profiling people based on a person's ethnic background, if they looked like they could be Muslim. So this was the after effect, like immediate after effect.
Right, and I think you bring that perspective of somebody who is Muslim, who's South Asian, who was in America, who was in New York at that time. So you were in the epicenter of everything that was going on. For me, Sumaya, and I also would like to just kind of encourage, our audience and whoever's watching to kind of just share your experience, if you have any, with 9/11 and the surrounding and the times around it. For me, the perspective that I bring is of an immigrant, right? I came into the United States in 2007 as a foreign student, so that was 14 years ago. And I remember the kind of not seeing many Muslims. So I went to small town Wisconsin. So my perspective is somebody who's an immigrant who went to small town Wisconsin,
right.
Small towns in America. To me, it was seeing that the response to 9/11 and how it just kind of seeped into smaller communities around the country, and the fear that's instilled into people just by listening to the word Muslim, Islam, Middle East, what it evokes in people. This is something that I saw firsthand. I remember not having a lot of Muslim friends. Again, my town was
Yeah.
97% white
Yeah.
Americans. So if you were different, you stood out like a sore thumb. And so I remember in 2009, I believe, there was a local bar in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is where I was at. And the bar owner went on stage and started chanting "F the Muslims." And he gave out free alcohol to college students. So there was a lot of people there. And I just remember being really shocked at hearing this, because this was somebody providing alcohol to children, to teenagers, to college-going students, and at the same time kind of inciting people and promoting violence. You just never know when somebody's drunk and what they could do. I remember, as a response to the event or the incident, we organized an awareness campaign to educate the community about Islam and the Middle East, and we had a few thousand people come to these events. It's a week-long event, and to me, I think it's about making the unknown known. When people really started interacting with these cultures, when people started interacting with people and they put a face to this foreign, unknown abstract idea, it makes people more comfortable. And that was a learning lesson for me.
So Daven, I know this was not an easy experience for you, right? So this was the first time you were in the US from Malaysia, and you came in as an immigrant at a time when the sentiment towards immigrants had changed, right? So after 9/11, prior to 9/11, immigration was about people migrating over here, about the labor and economy. And as soon as 9/11 happened, the attitude and the purpose of immigration changed. It all about security, right? That was the purpose of immigration, national security, and making sure we don't allow people in who could then participate in these events or, have another 9/11 happen. So as somebody who came in 2007 as an immigrant, besides it being an all-white town and hearing this incident, what was it like for you? What was the environment like? How did you feel as an immigrant?
For me, I think being somebody who doesn't outwardly look Muslim, I obviously did not face the brunt of the perhaps the hatred towards Muslims. For me, I loved my time in Wisconsin. Besides that incident, but I also think it was a learning experience, right? I really enjoyed being in America. To me, it introduced me into the rural life of Americans, and then from there, moving on to California and then moving to New York and just seeing different societies and living and interacting with people. For me, I was able to maneuver myself in my time in America just fine.
Yeah, I think that's great. I do know that a lot of people who did look a certain way had a difficult time. There was a period when even the Sikh community, they were affected because some people couldn't distinguish between who was Sikh and who was Muslim, and they were targeted. I do also remember there was mosques were being attacked and vandalized. We went through a period, right? There was certainly a shift in the attitude towards immigration. I think there was more of a welcoming attitude towards immigration, I felt that. Even though I was young, I felt that shift. And I remember the Bush administration, initially they wanted to have like a pro-immigration administration. That was kind of the intent. And then 9/11 happened, and that kind of shifted everything. And one of the things that happened were kind of, overlapping with what we wanted to discuss. But one of the things that happened was this creation of the Department of Homeland Security, right? Because the priority for everything became how do we protect Americans, and this fear that was installed in everyone of being attacked again, and that everybody else who was an immigrant, we should be afraid of that person, and somehow they were not American and should not have the same rights as those who were citizens.
Right, and I'm just seeing one of the questions that just came in from Paula, and it's about, are there any positive effects on immigration as a result of 9/11? That's something that we kept towards the end because we felt like it's something that we could discuss, and I think it's something that could be debatable. So we will address that in a bit. But yeah, Sumaya, I think, we just kind of spoke about our experiences and kind of the attitude of society towards immigrants and immigration as a whole. And then now we're kind of moving into the effects and the policy and the laws that came about from 9/11 and how it's affecting the people. And you mentioned the creation of DHS. So DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, previously was known as the INS, Immigration and Nationality Service, right? So INS was then taken away, and the Department of Homeland Security was created, and I think there were 22 agencies under the Department of Homeland Securities.
Agency with all of these things, including USCIS, ICE, and CBP, Customs and Border Protection, including all these other agencies under it, right? So that overarching department that was looking to influence immigration for the national security. I think that was a big change, right?
I think it was not a change in the positive direction. To me, it was taking out the INS from the Department of Justice and then putting it into Homeland Security, where it deals with issues of national security. So that's the issue right there. It's the making immigration, conflating immigration with national security, with issues of national security, and it was hard to really separate the two.
Yeah. And I mean, you see that effect today, right? With all of these types of cases, because you can be eligible for a type of petition or for a visa, but then you may not be admissible. You may not be able to get that visa or come here or get that green card if for some security reason, if there's some security reason, right? And we saw this change over the last few years where USCIS, previous INS, went from asking a few questions about a person's background to now asking a whole 2-3 pages of questions to identify if they're going to be a security threat to the United States. So on the one hand, I agree with you that those things should have been kept separate, right? Immigration separate from security issues. But on the other hand, I think there is something positive about that, because we do want people to come here who are not going to be a threat to the United States or harm the United States. Having said that, one of the things that is really frustrating for me, and I recently had a case about this, is post 9/11, there's something, so you can be inadmissible to the United States for various reasons, including security reasons. And one of the things that developed is something called, if you provide terrorism charges, right? If you participated in terrorist activities, if you provided material support to any organization, and they don't have to be a terrorist organization. They could be something labeled as Tier 3 terrorist organization. So a perfect example is, I have these clients who came from this country so many years ago, like over 20 years ago. They filed for asylum. They came from, and the country they came from at that time, it was very, very dangerous. And the basis of the asylum was appropriate for that time, right? And then afterwards, unfortunately, they didn't meet the requirements of asylum, so their spouse filed for asylum and they were granted. So then the whole family filed for a green card. The spouse and child got the green card, but the father, he didn't get the green card. So 20 years have passed by and we tried to figure out what went on. And then USCIS told us he is being charged with providing material support to a Tier 3 organization. So what's really frustrating about this is that this area of immigration law that says a person cannot get their green card because they provided material support, it's very unclear, and it happened as a result of 9/11. So somebody could be the best person, they could be a great father, a great citizen in all other ways, but because of something that happened many years ago and now this obscure law, they're not eligible to get a green card.
Yeah, and the providing support to terrorism grounds also include, regardless of whether a person is under duress or not, which to me was really interesting, because somebody would be forced to provide support and they would still then be barred from trying to immigrate into the United States. So Sumaya, we kind of talked about the establishment of DHS and problems of it becoming, immigration becoming a problem of a question of national security. What other policies of effects post 9/11, the immediate effect that you saw, especially in New York? And I know there's the stop and frisk, the militarization of police, I think, is a stop and frisk law started coming about.
really prevalent. There are a bunch of civil rights cases regarding this because police were randomly stopping people and identifying them as possible suspects or terror threats, you know. And then there was, I remember police were getting informants, right, to inform on people who they suspected of terrorist activity. They would go into mosques, etc. So I remember there was a situation with that. This was like many years ago, right? But I still remember like snippets of it. Also, there's something called like they started randomly taking people in without charging them for anything, and then they would just deport them for a visa violation. So they would keep them for weeks and never tell them why they were brought in. And then later they were just deported because they were immigrants who overstayed and some violated their visas. And this happened a lot after 9/11. And there were a number of other policies of like random detentions, random stops, randomly people being taken in. And a lot of it was a result of racial profiling.
Sure. And did you see this all throughout the Bush administration?
You know, that was so long ago. Certainly it was spread out, right? And I think this emphasis on deporting people for security reasons and then looking at people with their criminal background, certainly there was some of that. You know, the Bush administration, I was really young then. Young is relative, but I was in my teenage years. So it's hard for me to remember specifically other than these like memories. But I remember in the Obama administration, there was certainly a big emphasis on prioritizing people with criminal backgrounds and deporting people.
Sure.
Yeah, and sorry, David, I do remember like Guantanamo Bay, right? There are a lot of people kept at Guantanamo Bay. Like, it's 20 years.
And Guantanamo Bay is a creation or is a result of 9/11, the creation of Guantanamo Bay. I think the other thing is also, in my personal opinion, during that time, right? We're talking about domestic issues, but even the foreign policies, a lot of times I felt that Congress really didn't speak up against any of these foreign policies or domestic policies, because when America declared a war on terrorism, or when the Bush administration declared a war on terrorism, I felt that people were probably afraid to speak up because being seen as opposed to this war on terrorism was seen as being unpatriotic. And I think that led to a lot of problems.
Yeah, I remember that. I think that's when we went into Iraq, right?
Right.
Yeah, because people felt like as an American, you had to support us taking a stand against these other countries, predominantly Muslim countries, and you had to show your support for these foreign policies, even if you didn't agree with them. And certainly there are other agendas at play, right? But people didn't feel like they could say anything. And as a result, and it's not just with the foreign policies, we see it with the Patriot Act, we see it, the government, we allowed them to infiltrate our lives, right? And put in certain policies, create certain institutions in the interest of greater national security.
So I think we kind of talked a little bit about the policies and laws in the Bush administration. And I know you did allude to what it was like in the Obama administration in 2008 onwards. It's interesting also because Obama was known as the chief deportation officer at that time. And I think the numbers were about 400,000 deportations per year.
Speaking facts.
Yeah, and you know, yes, there were some really good policies, and I think towards his second term there were a lot more liberalization of immigration laws. You know, the creation of DACA and DAPA, but at the very beginning, in his first 4 years, there was an increase in deportation, and these included people who committed minor crimes, who are legal permanent residents or who are non-immigrants.
Yeah, there definitely was an increase in deportation, and people kind of forget that, right? Because his priority was people with certain criminal backgrounds, and then at the same time, somebody asked earlier about positive impacts. I think we can segue or address that a little bit. Under Obama, there was something called prosecutorial discretion, and I think that was something positive that came about in the Obama administration. Prosecutorial discretion means that they will emphasize discretion to keep people here who have been here for a while, who have certain family ties, who didn't have a criminal record, and in other ways, like where possibly good, future citizens, right? Or they closed up their cases and they could stay here without worrying about being deported. So this was something positive about that administration that came about as a result of 9/11. This emphasis on separating people who didn't have a criminal background from people who did, right? So this way we were acknowledging that some people, the only mistake they made is entering here without a visa.
Yeah, and there was the creation of DAPA, which is
Right.
DAPA and DACA still remains today. So those are positive effects that have come about in the history of immigration in the past 2 decades. I also do want to caveat the Obama administration with the fact that he did face an unprecedented number of arrivals from the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, and did I say Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras? And so these were hundreds and thousands of people coming in through the southern border. So I think there was an increase in removal enforcement because of this. But yeah.
I think that's a great point, because immigration policy is also impacted by history, right, and events and what's going on. We did have a significant number of people migrating here from Latin America, and this affected asylum law. Like, I think that's one of the biggest areas, and we saw that was the main feature of the Trump administration, right, going after asylum and shaping asylum. If we look at the past 20 years, one of the areas that changed substantially is asylum. For example, like I think in 2007 or so, we added the social visibility to asylum. Like, we added more requirements. Under the Trump administration is when, they really went in to address these people coming from Latin America, saying that with court cases, gang violence specifically is not a basis for getting asylum. Domestic violence isn't a basis for getting asylum. So we can see the gradual shift, right, between the administrations of how things are changing, how the policies are affected by what's happening. And a lot of it does segue back to 9/11 and this change in providing emphasis on security.
Sure. And, now that we have arrived in the Trump administration, let's talk about it. I think, to me, one word that really sums up the Trump administration, not one word, but a sentence, would be he really over-delivered on his promise of being anti-immigrant, and he did what he said he was going to do, and then he did so much more.
Yeah.
Right. So it was bringing back the anti-immigrant sentiment. Even in his campaign trails, it was immigrants are terrorists, immigrants are rapists. And what had happened then was when he got into office, everything that he said was going to happen happened. And we can talk a little bit about some of the things that you've seen, Sumaya. So go ahead. I mean, I only had 6 months of being a lawyer under Obama administration, and I think it was June of 2016, and then 2017 hit, and then I had 4 years of being an immigration lawyer under the Trump administration. I think it really did age me and just made it a very stressful 4 years. So let's talk a little bit about our experiences practicing under the Trump administration.
And somebody asked if 9/11, et cetera, had an impact on our decision to be immigration attorneys. I think to some extent, certainly yes, right? Wanting to play a role to help people, that played a role in my decision to be an immigration attorney. And you could read more about my personal journey on my page, but I remember practicing under Obama. I was like a newly minted attorney, and I do remember that things were more straightforward. There are certain policies in place. We knew that if we could put together a good case for somebody, show that they have family members here, it was important for them to be here with their family. They were otherwise a good person who didn't have a criminal background. We could at least close their court cases. This is for people with court cases, and they could stay here with their families. And we knew that we could do something, right? And we didn't live in fear every day of the law changing. And then under the Trump administration, it was literally living in fear every single day, hearing about some new executive order or some other policy change that would radically change some area of immigration law. And it was on all fronts, right? It was addressing at the border, like having people do credible fear interviews in Mexico and Guatemala instead of like here in the United States, detaining children, even as something, like on the other spectrum, changing forms like every few months. So we have to consistently update the work that we were doing, getting forms rejected because of blank spaces. So you're right, the Trump administration 100% over-delivered on their problem.
And I mean, the first order of business, right? I remember, I think it was January of 2017, the Muslim travel ban.
Yes.
Once that happens, and I remember it was within weeks of him taking office. And then there was the mass mobilization of attorneys. And I remember I was here too, at JFK with, I think, over 100 over attorneys. And these were bans from people coming in from predominantly Muslim countries.
Yeah,
so I remember the chaos in the airport. And I think you also mentioned that you were at an airport somewhere, correct?
So when that happened, I was actually in Puerto Rico, and it was so funny. Well, it was not funny, but we watched this happening, and we're just like, what? What is this Muslim ban? Ban? It felt like we were going back to that. Right after 9/11, because I can tell you, Daven, that feeling that we had, right? That fear of what is going to happen to us, especially for me as a Muslim woman, that same fear kind of came back around that time. And I was like, oh no, here we go again. Because in between that time, between 9/11, the administration, we made some headway addressing the discrimination, etc., and the sentiment towards Muslims. But when Trump came back, he brought back all the xenophobia, right? And especially the hatred towards Muslims, like we saw that. So I remember coming back from Puerto Rico, and we're at the airport. I stayed at the airport to help people, file these briefs, because there were a lot of people who were trying to get in, and all of a sudden this ban came into place and they couldn't come in. So it was a very chaotic time, but it was great to see all these immigration attorneys coming together, rallying in response to this ridiculous ban. And it's not just immigration attorneys. I think we did see a good response from the public as well, who identified this as like being what it, calling it for what it is, targeting Muslims.
Yeah, and right. And I think it was that mass mobilization of people protesting, of people just showing up. And this included just everybody from all walks of life, right? You pressure the government into paying attention to what's going on. And then, of course, the first travel ban got overturned. And then, of course, he came back with another travel ban and included non-Muslim countries into that list. So some of the other things that happened was, like you said earlier, it was an attack on immigration on all fronts.
Right.
Let's talk about the refugee levels. He brought down refugee levels to the lowest we've seen, I think, in forever, or maybe in years. And that really damaged a lot, impacted the whole refugee system.
The impact on refugees, it didn't just start with Trump. This was a deliberate effort after 9/11. In both asylum law, the number of refugees we would allow in, and putting up all these requirements for people to meet in order to get asylum here, right? Or to get refugee status. Like we saw that happening post 9/11, and then Trump, he just brought it all the way to the fore. It was at the heightened era, right?
And I think asylum laws changed so frequently. It was so hard to keep up. One day women could fall under a particular social group, and then the next thing you know, it's almost impossible. Family membership in a family was also previously recognized, and then the department, the Trump administration basically kind of overruled it as well. But this doesn't only involve asylum and refugee laws. But let's talk also about non-immigrants and immigrants under, for example, business visas, right? I remember...
Go ahead, David.
I remember the response to COVID and the backlash that happened over F1 students. So that's the same visa I came in under, F1 student visa, right? When schools were forced to be shut because of coronavirus, the administration basically said that if you are not going to school as an international student, you are violating your status. So even if you are doing online classes. So what happened? Thousands of international students were at risk of losing their visas, and I was just doing a quick research, and it was something like in 2018, the number of international students, I think it made out of maybe 1%, but they contributed about 40 billion to the U.S. economy. So schools in America is really benefiting from having international students in its economy. So what happened then was just, I think Harvard and a bunch of Ivy League schools kind of filed a lawsuit against the administration, and then they were able to get that ridiculous.
Yeah, that was one area. I think this was probably around June or something, right? June or July. I remember because first he went after the business visas, the H-1Bs, then he went after the student visas, and it was just getting ridiculous. And the reason why it was so ridiculous is that part of his whole thing is that Americans are taking away jobs. Immigrants are taking away jobs from immigrants. We need people here based on a merit system, right? Who are educated, who meet these certain requirements. And the truth is that these business visas, they don't take away jobs from Americans. In fact, to get a lot of these business visas, you have to prove that there aren't US workers available for that position. And you go through a lengthy process to establish that before that person can get that visa. And a lot of the business visas are for highly qualified individuals who are educated, who have a lot of professional experience. And these are the people that come here and that contribute to the US economy. We need these people. So they're not taking away jobs from Americans who aren't otherwise qualified for that. It's because we don't have Americans who are qualified for that we needed that. So I think for Trump, like a lot of his immigration policies didn't make any sense at all. The clear intent behind it was that we just don't want immigrants here. And it doesn't matter like what their background is. And honestly, regardless of whatever your political affiliations are and how you feel about this administration, et cetera, whatnot, if Trump had been reelected, immigration would be vastly different. It would have changed radically in a few months. And I think that was a very scary time for us, that was a real possibility.
And Sumaya and I, we both are immigration attorneys who also practice removal defense. So that means that we go to immigration court and we defend immigrants who are in removal proceedings, right? And one thing that I noticed was the stark difference in pre-Trump and then during Trump. I remember there was just such an air of hostility between the government attorneys and the immigration attorneys. They stopped prosecutorial discretion, which you talked about, which was available during the Obama administration, and that was wiped off. And they were just not willing to concede to or stipulate to anything at that point. So it was a very contentious 4 years practicing in immigration court, and it was truly exhausting. So I, for one, am really glad that we are kind of out of it, and then now going into the Biden administration. So Maya, what are your thoughts on where we are now?
I think this is a segue into the Biden administration. You're right. Like under the Obama administration, what was nice is because I do practice removal defense, I remember that we would be able to speak with the government attorneys in advance about certain cases, and they would stipulate to certain things. We would be able to administratively close a case to allow somebody to undergo the processing for another type of visa or something that would make them eligible for immigration relief. So there was a collaborative effort to some extent. And at the end of the day, like if you're trying to help people, you can still do both your job as a government attorney and as private attorneys, right? Without violating the law and making sure that the law is upheld. In the Trump administration, the attitude was that, no, whatever it is, there's no way we're collaborating. And that was very, very difficult, especially since they got rid of administrative closure, which is when they would temporarily close the case to allow you to process something else, and then later you'd be able to reopen it if you had something taken care of, etc. I'm simplifying this a lot, but essentially this was something positive. Right now, under the Biden administration, I think we're going back a little bit to how things were during the Obama administration. Some of our colleagues who work for DHS government attorneys are a lot more collaborative. They're open to discussing cases, stipulating certain things before we go to court. So for me, that's a really positive change. And we have seen Obama address some of the cases from the Trump administration where they said, family ties would not be sufficient for our asylum law. Well, now, they vacated that. Also about domestic violence. So the good thing is we do see that the Biden administration is addressing a lot of the things that impacted immigration in a negative way. But what's crazy to me is how quickly you can change the law, right? I think that's been something interesting to see, because Trump literally changed immigration law every other day. And now we see that, yeah, you can change it for the positive, but I think it's also kind of scary that we can literally change the law in a day, which impacts the lives of so many different people.
Yeah. And we at the very beginning, we were talking about society's attitude towards immigration, and I think somebody asked that same question about how has immigration changed over the past 20 years and how people perceive them. I think 20 years ago, it was that anti-immigrant sentiment, right? And then it kind of got better, and then it got worse, and then now it's returning back. And I think there has been a lot of vocal support for immigration and for immigrants, and I think now we're in a space where immigration is at the forefront of issues that we're discussing. And I think when Biden came in, one of his campaign promises was restoring America to its roots. And what is more American when this nation was built on immigrants than actually building up the immigration system again? Immigration reform, that's a highly contentious issue that I don't even know when it will actually pass, but we are seeing...
or something. Do you have a quote here, David?
Do I have a what?
Do you have a quote for us this time here, or does it?
Oh, no, I don't have a quote right now.
But it's a great point that you make, right? Like, what is the foundation of the United States? It's immigration. It's people from all different backgrounds. And since 20 years have passed, I think we can see the progression from 9/11, the anti-immigrant sentiment, and then, the Trump administration. That was just a particular period when, people highlighted, it was really highlighted, the sentiment that people had towards immigrants. That kind of reminded us of right after 9/11. But I think overall, we've done a lot of work and we've made a lot of progress, and people are more receptive to immigrants. They realize that immigrants contribute quite a bit to the United States. And what is it? We're all immigrants. Like, we all are, pretty much.
Except the Native Americans, but yeah.
Right. But yeah, this is the core of America. So I think that 9/11, immigration existed prior to 9/11, but that was an event that certainly had a tremendous impact on immigration, and we've seen it trickle out through the years, right? And even now, having impact.
Sumaya, Paula asked earlier about positive impacts of immigration post 9/11. It's hard for me to think of one, but I think on the non-immigration side, the creation of TSA, I think making sure that our borders are more safe now, and that people are able to be vetted. Or even, I heard that before you could actually just walk through the gates without actually taking off your shoes, and you could just walk up to the boarding gate and without even having a ticket. So I think now that increased security even at airports. On the immigration side, I think, in some ways, I think the vetting of people is helpful. Mm-hmm. You vet them before they come into the United States. And I think that is some positive change that has come about.
So do you mean this is the vetting in terms of at the airport, or are you also talking about vetting people through their immigration application? Vetting
people through the immigration application. So for people trying to get visas to come into the United States, one of the first things they need to do is fill out this form online, the DS-160 or the DS-260, and then go for a consular interview in their home country at the U.S. Embassy or consulate there. At the embassy, they'll interview you and they'll vet you. And so that in and of itself is a way to kind of just ensure that people that are coming into the United States are not linked to terrorism.
Right. Yeah, I think it does create more paperwork, and it just creates some extra steps in terms of filling out the applications, right? And making sure, because all these questions that you have to address, and making sure you're not inadmissible because of something in your background for security reasons. But I agree that if you meet all those requirements, it's for the benefit of people who are living over here. And the airport security, initially I was very annoyed by that, like taking off your shoes, this heightened security, because we weren't used to it. But I agree, like, it is for our safety. Not just anybody can come into the United States. You can't just come in carrying some weapon, etc. It does add to a higher sense of confidence about whether you'll be safe in the United States or not, like physically. It doesn't mean that people cannot enter the United States any other way, or, somebody I hopefully will not be able to, but it helps me to feel a little bit better knowing that there are certain measures in place physically at airports, but also prior to that with immigration applications that are vetting out people, because, if they're otherwise eligible, it shouldn't keep them from immigrating to the United States.
Right. Should we answer a few more questions that are on there? I see Yoshira Nair basically asked, what happens when things don't go the way you hope in a case? How do you reconcile that?
Time. Do you want to address that? And then I'm happy to add some thoughts to it as well.
Sure. And this speaks to the difficulty I faced in the past 4 years in the Trump administration. It's because of all the changing asylum laws. Sometimes, even before going to a case, I know that I'm going to lose that case, and there's nothing that I can do to prevent the judges from deporting my client. And it broke me over and over again. It was hard because I had to toughen myself up, knowing that it's just a loss. But it's hard when you know that somebody who's deported back to their home country, that they are fleeing persecution, that is like a death sentence, right? And you want to try and defend your clients. You want to try and help them. And when that doesn't go your way, sometimes it's really hard. But then it's also taking care of yourself and knowing that, you know what, you're going to try your best. And what you can do in court is to preserve these issues so that in the future, you can appeal these issues. And if there's a change in laws, which there are a lot now, you can then go back and say there's been a change in law. I would like to reopen this case and pursue the relief that I was seeking before. So I think it's just trying to remain positive in the midst of chaos. And that's how I reconcile my feelings of losing cases.
I think that's one of the that's one of the toughest things as an immigration attorney. There are some cases where we can be creative, right? There's some cases where we know definitely do to get an approval in the sense that these are the requirements and this requirements because of this documentary evidence, etc., whatnot. And then there are other cases where we know this is what the law says, and this person does not meet the requirements at all under the law. And even if they're facing dangerous situations back home, because they don't fit under the law, their claim doesn't fit, unfortunately their case may not be granted. And we're talking more about asylum cases or cases before the immigration court. Unfortunately, the law is the law, and there is some room to be creative and show how people meet these requirements. And immigration law is a very fact-based area. However, there are other things where it's just what it is, and there's nothing we can do. And somebody may have exhausted all of their resources, like their case may have been denied, they may have appealed it, and unfortunately there really is nothing else to do but for them to go back home. And I think that's the toughest part of being an immigration attorney. And I think that's also really tough for clients. Clients really struggle with that sometimes when I tell them they really don't have any other options left, that they've exhausted all of their resources, and it's hard to see their reaction, especially people who are detained, right? Or they're about to be deported and go back home. That's hard to see.
Yeah. I think another question that came about was if 9/11 had impacted your decision to become an immigration attorney. You answered that, I believe.
We briefly talked about it. But yeah, did it affect your decision to become an immigration attorney?
I think for me, it was one of the first things that really got me interested into international human rights laws. The war that came about from 9/11 to me, based on it violated international human rights law. So it just kind of brought me down that route. And then growing up in Malaysia, being a minority, it was a lot of discrimination that I faced in my society. And then coming to America and seeing the same thing happen here towards minorities and towards African Americans, to me really solidified that I want to stand for something that would help defend the minority people, that would give voice to the voiceless. So yeah, I mean, not directly perhaps, but everything has a correlation, and I think I am where I am today because of the sum of all my past.
100%. Yeah, I agree with you. For me as well. Like it wasn't like 9/11 happened and it like as a teenager in high school, I knew right then that I was going to become an immigration attorney. Rather, there was a series of events. And I remember I was in ninth grade. I remember that for sure. I was in ninth grade when 9/11 happened and we had a project where we had to talk persuasively about something we were passionate about. And I remember picking, and we had to persuade people. And my topic was about the rights of women in Islam. And I think that was the year where, well, other people were afraid of wearing hijabs and taking off their hijabs. That's the year I made the decision to wear the hijab all the time. And I researched the rights of women, and I shared it with my classmates and presented on it. And for me, that was very powerful because 9/11 made me really look into my religion. What does it stand for? Is there some reason that I should give up this part of my identity? Or is this something that I should embrace? And, it did the opposite for me. I think it made me more brave, right? To go out and publicly proclaim with my hijab and say, I am a Muslim, and this is who I am, and I am not a threat to you in any way. I am just like you. So that incident, it really, I think, was the beginning of my interest in advocating for women's rights and then advocating for people, which then transitioned into later going into law school and then becoming an attorney to help people, and then to help people who, like me, are immigrants, right? I came here as a young child immigrant. So certainly it's not a, direct, this happened and therefore I became an immigration attorney, but it played a role. Do we have questions that we'd like to address?
I haven't seen any. I think we answered everything that's in the chat. Give me a second. Let me just look through. Yeah, I think we answered everything in the chat. If people have more questions, you're more than welcome to write to us.
Sorry, go ahead. Yes, somebody asked how to apply for asylum. So, we won't go into that in this discussion. You're welcome to visit our website to learn more about it. But generally, to file for asylum, you have to have a fear of returning to your home country as a result of some past persecution that you faced, and therefore you have a well-founded fear of future persecution. I'm using legal terms over here, but essentially you have to show that on the basis of your race, religion, political opinion, belonging to some social group or your nationality, you will be in danger in your home country. And there are some specific requirements that have to be met, and you have to file within the 1 year. So the reason there are all of these specific requirements, actually these things kind of evolved over the last 20 years, right? Asylum law became a lot more strict in requiring that somebody clearly establish they meet these legal requirements. So you're welcome to learn more about it, but that's essentially the basis of how you file for asylum. Well, not how you file for asylum, but the requirements you need to meet.
Yeah, maybe we can have a session in the future about how to apply for asylum and asylum.
Yes, certainly.
Should we conclude then? Since I think we are about time already.
Yes. Do you have any final thoughts, Daven, that you want to share before we end this discussion?
Actually, I want to share, before giving my conclusion, I do want to share something that I read online today and then actually researched. At the time of 9/11, I mean, it's not a funny issue. At the time of 9/11, when the towers came down, in that afternoon, Trump had a interview with WR Channel 9, which is a local TV station in New York. At that time, Trump was a real estate developer and a celebrity on national TV. He was also the owner of a building called 40 Wall Street. So I'm going to quote him. This is a direct quote. I'm going to read from here. Okay, 40 Wall Street actually was the second tallest.
All right, go ahead. Start again.
Okay. 40 Wall Street actually was the second tallest building in downtown Manhattan. And it was actually, before the World Trade Center, it was the tallest. And then when they built World Trade Center, it became known as the second tallest. And now it's the tallest. This was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the day of the destruction of the World Trade Centers. To me, it was everything that I needed to know about Trump then, and it's everything that I need to know about him now. The funny thing was, Sumaya, people fact-checked him, and it was still not the second tallest building in Manhattan at that time. So that was just something funny that I wanted to share.
Yeah.
Now, as far as my concluding thoughts, I think what we can say that we have learned is that terrorism, or trying to defeat terrorism, it demands certain nuances, and it demands a very delicate balance. And I think I know that deeply restricting immigration, which is the very fabric of American society, is not the way to go. And it makes me really happy to see the societal attitude towards immigration, and seeing it become better and become more friendly towards immigration and immigrants. It makes me happy to see that. And I do hope to see that America continues in this path of welcoming immigrants, in this path of making sure that immigrants are beneficial members of society and contribute to the economy. So I'm hopeful, and I think that we have come a long way. And I think the final thought is that hopefully we are more prepared, and we will not face any more threats in the future without the proper defense, I guess.
Yeah. No, those are some great final thoughts. I mean, 9/11 is an event that none of us are ever going to forget, especially those of us who witnessed it, who were here. And it's been 20 years, but I think we can see that we've made a lot of progress, even with the changes in administration, even with the tightening of immigration laws and some of the negative impacts, and especially like what happened during the Trump administration. We have made progress as a country in regards to immigration. More people are aware of immigration. They understand it's more than just filing petitions, that policies affected what we do, and that we have a responsibility to respond to what the government says, right, or changes in law, because immigration law is not set in stone. It's constantly evolving. And I think this gives us some hope for the Biden administration. When he started his administration in January, he talked about this pathway to a green card. I mean, so far we don't have that yet, but who knows? Maybe we will have something that will come about in the future that could get hundreds of people, thousands of people, you know, who live in the United States, who've been living here for so many years, but there currently isn't any way for them to get legal status or adjust, that they can finally be here, get a green card, stay with their families, not worry about being deported. So I think there is some hope for the future, and we have to stay hopeful. Even when the law changes and policies are enacted that have a negative impact on immigration, or that prevent people from getting some sort of relief or visa, it doesn't mean it'll stay that way forever. And I think that's the best lesson from over the 20 years, seeing that there are periods of when things aren't great, and then there will be change when things will get better. So I think on that note, we can end. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in this discussion. We're excited to have you join us on our future discussions. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to us, and you can learn more about us on our website at www.kalikalaw.com. Thank you, Daven, from the Smith-Driscoll Law Group, for joining us today, and I hope everybody has a good night. All right, take care. Bye.
Bye, guys.